There is a specific sensation that arrives sometime after your 60th birthday. Eventually, you notice the fog has lifted. For decades, you've been driving fast, eyes fixed on the bumper in front of you, reacting to every honk and swerve. Then, suddenly, the road clears. You realize that the miles behind you are far greater than the miles ahead. This realization doesn't bring panic, it brings clarity. This clarity birthed what I call the final filter.
It is a mental mechanism I developed to separate what truly matters from the noise I spent decades chasing. The first half of our lives is defined by accumulation, gathering titles, possessions, and obligations. But the second half operates on a different physics. It is about release. It is about alignment. The core truth I want to share with you is this. The second act isn't about doing less because you're tired. It's about applying the final filter to move from a life of chronic doing, where value is measured by exhaustion, to a life of intentional being. If you are feeling stuck between the life you built and the life you actually want, this shift is for you. The first layer of the final filter catches the heaviest debris we carry, the need for external validation. I look back now and I am astounded by the sheer amount of energy I incinerated trying to impress a vague, faceless crowd. I bought cars to impress neighbors I didn't talk to. I took promotions to impress classmates I hadn't seen in 20 years. I adjusted my opinions to avoid friction with strangers. I was performing a play for an audience that wasn't even watching. In psychology, there is a concept called detached concern. It is often used to describe how doctors or therapists can care deeply for a patient without being emotionally destroyed by the patient's pain. They care, but they maintain a boundary that preserves their own sanity. As we age, we need to apply a version of this to our social lives. We need to reach a place where we can wish others well and contribute to our communities, without being emotionally hijacked by their opinions of us. The final filter made me realize that the theater of my life was mostly empty. We walk around terrified of judgment, assuming everyone is critiquing our career choices or our retirement plans. But this realization allows you to shift your focus from external validation to internal alignment. Internal alignment simply asks, does this decision make me feel more like myself? Their validation doesn't pay your bills, and it certainly doesn't bring you peace. Once you accept that the audience has left the building, the silence can be startling. You are left alone on the stage. And this brings us to the next challenge. Because once we stop performing for others, we have to confront the exhausting ways we perform for ourselves. This brings us to the most subtle and dangerous trap of the first half of life, treating your existence like a project that needs to be finished. Philosophers call this the telic mindset, from the Greek telos, meaning end or goal. A telic activity is something you do solely to finish it. You drive to get to the destination. You work to get the retirement savings. The problem is that satisfaction is always deferred. You are never actually in the moment. You are always leaning forward into the next one. Here is the philosophical irony that the final filter caught. Telic activities always end in one of two ways. If you fail to reach the goal, you feel frustration. If you do reach the goal, the activity is over, and you are left with a sudden emptiness. The project is dead because you finished it. I spent 40 years in this trap, treating my life like a giant checklist. Once the mortgage is paid, I'll enjoy the house. It is a recipe for perpetual dissatisfaction. The final filter forces a shift to an atelic mindset. Atelic activities are things you do for the sake of doing them. There is no terminal point. You don't go for a walk to finish the walk. You walk to be walking. You don't spend time with your spouse to complete the relationship. You do it to be in the relationship. When I applied this filter, I realized I was trying to win at life, as if there were a trophy at the end. When you operate from a telic mindset, you are rushing through your days to get to a future that, statistically, is getting shorter. The final filter catches this obsession. It asks, are you rushing through this coffee to get to work, or are you drinking the coffee? Think about the difference between walking to get to the store and walking just to feel the air on your face. The physical action is the same, but the internal experience is entirely different. One is a chore, the other is a joy. The second act of life demands that we convert as many of our days as possible from telic projects into atelic experiences. We have to stop waiting to be done with our responsibilities to start living. This shift is profound, but it is also disorienting. When you stop treating your life as a project, you lose the easy metrics of success. You can no longer point to the scoreboard. And when the scoreboard is gone, you have to reevaluate the labels you use to define the players. This leads us to the heavy costume we've been wearing for decades. This leads us directly into the third filter, which deals with the identity we constructed to survive in that telic world. Specifically, it addresses the difficulty of shedding our professional titles. For 40 years, I wore my career like a second skin. I was a senior director, or a vice president, and I allowed those labels to become a proxy for my soul. I suspect many of you have done the same. We introduce ourselves by our function. We measure our worth by our output. And when we finally step away, whether through retirement or a simple shift in priorities, we don't just feel a loss of income, we feel a loss of self. This is where the final filter initiates a process psychologists call identity reclamation. It is the deliberate, often uncomfortable work of separating who you are from what you did. It sounds simple on paper, but in practice, it is terrifying. When the emails stop coming and the calendar clears, a quiet panic sets in. You ask yourself, if I am not a director, do I exist? If I am not solving problems, am I still valuable? The final filter catches this panic and reframes it. It forces you to see that your career was never your skin, it was just a costume. It was a necessary outfit you wore to play a role in the market economy, where you are valued for your scarcity and utility. But the second half of life operates in the soul's economy, where you are valued for your character and connection. Holding on to a past title is like refusing to leave the stage after the play has ended. Retirement isn't a decline into irrelevance, it is the act of hanging up a role that no longer fits. When you strip away the title, you are left with the human being underneath. You are left with your curiosity, your kindness, and your capacity to listen. These are the things that actually matter to the people who love you. I promise you, your grandchildren do not care about your quarterly projections from 1998. They care about your presence. The final filter asks you to reclaim the identity that existed before the world told you who you were supposed to be. It asks you to be brave enough to be just you, without the prop of a business card. Once the costume is off, however, you might find that you are still carrying something heavy underneath it. This brings us to the fourth filter, the processing of past failures. We all have a tendency to carry around a museum of mistakes. We curate this museum with agonizing detail. We walk through its halls at 3 in the morning, replaying the awkward conversation from a decade ago, the business venture that went belly up, or the relationship we allowed to fracture. We visit these exhibits because we buy into the preservation lie. This is the false belief that if we hold on to the guilt, we will prevent ourselves from making the same mistake again. We think our shame is a shield. But the final filter reveals that shame is not a shield, it is a chain. It keeps you tethered to a version of yourself that no longer exists. When I applied the final filter to my own museum of mistakes, I realized I needed to reframe the exhibits. I stopped looking at my failures as evidence of my unworthiness and started seeing them as the tuition I paid for wisdom. You cannot have the wisdom you possess today without the errors you made yesterday. That awkwardness, those bad decisions, that financial loss, that was the price of admission for the clarity you have now. The final filter suggests a radical form of forgiveness. You have to forgive the younger version of yourself. You have to realize that the 30-year-old you was simply navigating in the dark. To judge your past self with your current wisdom is unfair. The second act of life requires you to close the museum. You have learned the lessons. You don't need to keep staring at the wreckage. When you let go of the need to punish yourself for the past, you free up an immense amount of energy for the present. And you will need that energy, because making peace with the past is the only way to prepare for the uncertainty of the future. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most difficult, layer of the filter, letting go of the illusion of control. For the first 60 years of life, we are obsessed with certainty. We try to tame the future. We build 5-year plans, we overinsure, we hoard savings, and we worry incessantly. We treat the future like a wild horse that we can break if we just hold the reins tight enough. We do this because we believe that if we can predict the future, we can avoid pain. But the final filter exposes this for what it is: a fantasy. If you look back at your life honestly, you will admit that the most significant events, both the beautiful and the tragic, were rarely on your calendar. The love of your life, the sudden illness, the chance opportunity, the market crash, none of these were in the 5-year plan. The anxiety we feel comes from the gap between how we think the world should work and how it actually works. We spend our days what-if-ing ourselves into a state of paralysis. What if the money runs out? What if my health fails? What if I end up alone? The final filter blocks out the noise of what if, so you can finally hear the music of what is. It demands a shift from a mindset of certainty to a mindset of curiosity. Certainty is impossible, curiosity is infinite. This doesn't mean you stop planning entirely, it means you stop emotionally attaching yourself to the outcome of the plan. Instead of trying to control what happens next, you shift your stance to one of openness. You say, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I trust my ability to navigate it when it arrives. You realize that the only thing you truly possess is this present moment. The future is just a ghost we give our life to. When you stop trying to wrestle the future to the ground, you find a strange, quiet peace. You realize that you have handled everything life has thrown at you up to this point. You are resilient. You don't need to control the waves, you just need to trust that you can swim. When you combine these filters, reclaiming your identity, releasing your past failures, and surrendering your need for control, something shifts in your chest. The tightness loosens. You are no longer fighting against the current of time, you are floating with it. And that brings us to the final realization of what this lightness actually feels like. When you finally apply this filter, the result isn't emptiness, it is a profound sense of lightness. You aren't losing yourself, you are finding the room to breathe. Let's be clear, this isn't about apathy. It is about the strategic allocation of your heart. You are simply deciding to stop watering the weeds so you can finally tend to the flowers. I want you to identify one heavy thing you are carrying right now, a grudge, a worry, or a title, that will mean absolutely nothing on your final day. Can you put it down? If you are ready to build a second act defined by being rather than doing, please subscribe to the channel. We are walking this path of reinvention together, and the road ahead may be shorter than the road behind, but I promise you, without all that extra baggage, the walk is going to be much more beautiful.